What is the goal of the life? Is to create yourself a soul. For me, movies are an art, more than an industry. And it's a search of the human soul, as painting, as literature, as poetry. Movies are that for me. Yo quería hacer una película que diera a la gente que tomaba LSD en esa época las alucinaciones que la droga daba sin alucinación. Yo no quería que se tomara LSD, yo quería fabricar la droga. El cine iba a cambiar la mentalidad del público. Mi ambición con Dune fue tremenda. Y entonces lo que yo quise es crear un profeta. I want to create a prophet, to change the young mind of all the world. For me, Dune will be the coming of a god, artistical, cinematographical god. For me, it was not to make a picture. It was something deeper. I wanted to make something sacred, free, with new perspective, open the mind. Because I feel in that time myself inside a prison, my ego, my intellect. I want to open. I start the fight to make Dune.
Il fallait un grain de folie pour le faire. Un chef-d'œuvre n'existe pas sans folie. Pink Floyd, Dali, ou ceux d'Orson Welles ou d'autres. Peut-être que Dune avait trop de folie. Mais un film qui n'a pas un grain de folie, il ne va pas conquérir le monde entier.
I was in Paris with my wife at Jodorowsky's house and having dinner. And very late into the evening, he goes, if I wanted to see Dune. And I was like, I don't know, you made it. And he goes, well, he did. And he pulls out, the famous Dune book that apparently only exists 2 copies left in the universe. And I then sat with him in front of me for a very long time and just went through the book. And he would explain his thoughts and his ideas. And, when I heard about the team that he had assembled to make this movie, sitting there at night, 2 a.m. at his house, seeing the book, looking at the images, and hearing Jodorowsky telling me what was going to happen in every scene. So, in a way, I'm the only guy who actually ever saw Jodorowsky's Dune. I am the only spectator that has seen the movie. And I'm going to tell you something. It's awesome.
Dune is probably the greatest movie never made. It continues to influence us and will go on influencing generations to come, despite the fact that it doesn't exist, that we cannot rent it, we cannot watch it.
What if the first film of that nature had been Dune and not Star Wars? Would the whole mega bucks blockbuster structure have been altered?
I think there's this cliche phrase about movies being ahead of their time. I think that Jodorowsky's Dune might have been the most literally ahead of its time movie ever.
Je crois que c'est jamais dans l'histoire du cinéma un film aura été aussi avancé pour ne pas devenir un film. ou pour devenir un autre film, puisqu'il y a eu un film mais qui n'a rien à voir avec ces 2 ans et demi de travail.
If Alejandro's Dune could have been made, it would have been bigger than 2001.
It was built up to be the greatest achievement in science fiction, and it just evaporated into a billion small black pieces of space.
In the beginning, I was making theater. In Mexico, I make 100 theater plays. In 10 years, I make the avant-garde theater. Ionesco, Beckett, Strindberg, adaptation, modern adaptation of Shakespeare, I do. One day I will make a picture.
From the very beginning of his film career, what he was doing was driving people crazy. His first film, Fondo Elise, it premiered in Acapulco at a film festival, and there was an actual full-scale riot. I mean, people went crazy, and it was so nuts that Mexico banned the film.
When I came to pictures, I came like a virgin, without to know technical movement. I didn't know lens, the number, I didn't know. We shoot Fondo Elise, hiding of juniors. In Mexico, a young director cannot make picture without the permission of the old director, juniors. I say, what I need to take the permission to make art? Artists need to be free. I do my picture. Then it was a great scandal later, because I broke all the unions. I did. I was opening the mind of the industry.
Be prepared to live the most wonderful experience of your life. El Topo is miraculous and terrible. It's violent. El Topo is more than spectacle. It is an experience for all of your life.
El Topo really was the original midnight movie, the original cult film, the first movie that played exclusively at midnight screenings and drew a loyal cult audience. What I find extraordinary about El Topo is it's his first major movie, and Jodorowsky is producing, writing and directing and playing the lead, and he gives himself that immortal line,
Soy Dios.
I am God.
J'ai rencontré ça dans le Underground Cinema à New York. Et après, nous avons eu le courage de tenter l'opération de le distribuer en France. Et c'était un succès très incroyable sur ce film qui était un film assez révolutionnaire. Et c'est créé une amitié naturelle entre Alejandro et moi.
Gracias al éxito del Topo, tuve $1 million para hacer La Montaña Sagrada. Hice lo que quise. No tuve ni un productor, ni un crítico, nadie se metió conmigo. Hice lo que quise y fue La Montaña Sagrada.
Holy Mountain really is an extraordinary film. It feels like a work of art that's come from a parallel world, from a totally different version of the film industry where there really are no limits.
Le di la película a Michel Seydoux en Francia y, oh sorpresa, en Europa atrajo mucho público, en pleno centro se daba, en Italia ese año fue la segunda película después de James Bond, La montaña sagrada, era increíble. Entonces mi ambición aumentó. Michel Seydoux called me from Paris and said to me, Holy Mountain is a success. I want to make a new picture with you. Do whatever you want.
J'ai jamais fait de film ou d'opération s'il n'y avait pas quelque chose de plus, une relation entre les êtres humains qui fait la différence.
He said, I want to produce you anything. What do you want to do? I say, Dune. And he said, yes.
Pourquoi? Parce que c'était un livre c'était le plus beau livre de science-fiction, c'est la Bible de la science-fiction pour tous les grands amateurs, que ce livre avait été un succès d'édition mondial, qu'on le trouvait dans tous les pays.
I didn't read Dune, but I have a friend who said it was fantastic. I don't know what I say Dune. I can say Don Quixote, or I can say Hamlet, I don't know, anything. I say Dune.
Dune is this sprawling space epic that focuses on the planet Arrakis, a desert planet where this spice, melange, is found. This consciousness-expanding drug, which is one of the most important commodities in the entire universe.
This makes Dune into a planet of extraordinary strategic importance. Almost, I guess, the galactic version of Afghanistan.
Paul Atreides is a young noble. Paul gets cast out of his house and leads a revolution of the Fremen, the local natives on Arrakis, to take over the planet from the evil colonial Harkonnens who are controlling it, and to sort of return power of the spice to the people.
So, of course, the idea of imbibing a spice that opens time and space to you, ding, that couldn't have been more right for that moment. And so that's why it's a weird Hollywood film. Like, it's a weird idea for Hollywood to ever tangle with Dune.
En Hollywood le vendieron por nada los derechos, burlándose, yo creo, en el interior, creyendo que nunca íbamos a poder realizar tal cosa. Fue una aventura enorme hacer el script. Michel Seydoux nos trajo a Francia, arrendó un castillo enorme, y yo estaba en el castillo dedicado solamente a Dune. Frank Herbert creó un mundo, pero en Dune no dijo completamente lo que era esto. Y tú, para entrar en ese mundo, tienes 100 páginas de literatura donde tienes que ir descubriendo con gran dificultad de qué se trata el libro. Es como, yo lo comparo a Proust en la literatura francesa. Es literario, es de la gran literatura. The first 100 pages, you understand almost nothing. It's insinuations. And then to bring literature to image is completely difficult. You need to create another world, the optical world. It's not the literary auditive world. All the time, even in the little details, I was trying to find the spiritual meaning of that picture. Now I have my script. I need to find the warriors. The warriors to do it. Every person who will work in this picture will be a spiritual warrior. the best I will find.
Il a eu le génie de faire un storyboard avec Möbius.
I find a comic book. The comic book was Blueberry, cowboy book, drawing by Giro. I start to see, but that guy is my camera. Who is this?
Giro was the most fantastic figure artist. He could draw anything. Giro was probably France's most famous and most talented bande dessinée artist.
This is the person I need. Where I will find this person? Where? In that time was not internet to find any person. I need to find this person. I went to see my agent, publicity agent, and there he was. By chance, he was there. He said, I am Moebius. When I draw in science fiction, I am not Giro, I am Moebius. And I say to him, you are the person. Come with me. Drawing by drawing, I shoot the picture. I need 3,000 drawings. Point of view, movement of the camera, dialogue, the relation between the actors. I use Moebius like a camera. I take Moebius, I say, now you advance, now you travel, and now you make a close-up. I have Moebius, who was a genius. Moebius was a genius because he was not only an artist with an incredible capacity, but he was very quick. Was superhuman. He was quickly, rapido, incredible. And then I could shoot. Every day we start to shoot at 8 o'clock we come. We prepare everything. I think at 9:30 we start to shoot. I made the picture with drawings. And then in the costume, I say to him, I describe what I wanted. He immediately, quick, more than a computer. He was incredible. Everything became magic when we was doing this picture. Everything, everything. Dune, my Dune, start with a long shot. I admire the long shot of Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. La camera go, traverse the street, go. It's fantastic. Big long shot. And then I wanted to start doing with a long shot. Better than the long shot of Orson Welles. I wanted to go farthest. And then all the shot is traversing the whole universe. You go there and you traverse, the camera traverse all the galaxy la traverse, and in the traverse of the galaxy you see pirate robbing a convoy of spies, by example, battles, and you go. It's a long shot.
Having looked at some of the storyboards and being aware of what he was trying to accomplish, I honestly don't know how he could have done it in 75. His vision was so huge, so beyond what anybody else was doing at that time. You look back at what George Lucas struggled to accomplish in 77 with Star Wars, and here's Jodorowsky a couple of years before that going with things that Lucas wasn't even going to try in the prequel films. I mean, it's enormous.
We need to find the person who will make the special effect. I say, Moebius, we fly to California, to Los Angeles, to the appointment of Douglas Trumbull.
At that time in the early 70s, why Doug Trumbull was probably the premier visual effects guy around, and everyone had known his work on 2001.
He was a very honored, very important person. He received me. He was interesting. Was a business. Oh my gosh. Hey. Flor. Psst. Flor. Bien. Shh. Silencio. Alors, we went to see Trumbull, but he gives himself so big importance. We was speaking, he answered 40 times the telephone, 40 times. Right. He was speaking with so big vanity of himself. He was a big technician, but for me was not a spiritual person. He had nothing to do in the creation of a film who was a prophet. He will make a technical film, no?
Trumbull had a very specific way he wanted to work, and Kubrick had given him pretty much carte blanche to do what he wanted to do within certain bounds. So some filmmakers who wanted to control more what the visual style was were a bit put off by that.
And then I say, I cannot work with you. And we went out. Moebius was astonished, say, how you can say no to the biggest technician of Hollywood? I say, it is like that. I cannot use it. He's not my spiritual warrior. And then we was walking in the street of Hollywood. It was a little cinema, a little theater, and there was a science fiction picture, Dark Star. And when I see the picture, that is the guy. O'Bannon. We'll search for this person will be the person.
Dan was from rural Missouri, the Ozarks, and he didn't even have a phone until he was like 10. That's the first time he talked on the phone. So he read Mark Twain stories and didn't realize they were old. He thought they were like contemporary stories. So he's kind of a guy out of time in a very strange way, but he was always attracted to science fiction and whatnot.
For me, the art was before, later the technique, and that was O'Bannon.
I thought I was pretty well prepared for him. I thought I had a very clear image of him as this very erudite lunatic, and I was steeling myself for the interview. In El Topo, he had this long hair down to his shoulders and a big beard, and he was a raving lunatic. He acted in his own films. And I was greeted at the door by this charming continental gentleman, clean-shaven with styled hair. He goes back and he gets out of his suitcase, comes out with this little piece of folded-up newspaper, and he says, this is special marijuana. I said, oh boy. All I remember is I was getting incredibly relaxed and that I was looking straight into his eyes. When all of a sudden, at the conclusion of a sentence, he said, like this, and wham, out from his face shot these radiating lines of patterns which proceeded to produce around his head a circular, shimmering mandala or kaleidoscope-like pattern with his face in the center and his eyes fixed on mine and the rest of the room vanishing into oblivion. And then he relaxed all of his features. The eyes, which had been staring into mine like something supernatural, all of a sudden relaxed down the head. Lids came down and the face smiled and it changed back. The 20 years came back onto his face. And the hallucinative visual effect and the mental effect dispersed immediately. Just bing. And I was completely dazzled. I was dazed at the experience. He said, "All right, I want you to do the special effects." And I said, "All right." I said, "Well, hell yes." He said, "Good." I'll never forget his words. He says, "Now sell everything you own and come to Paris and prepare to have your life changed."
And then he came to Paris. And that was, I have two warriors, Moebius and O'Bannon. I need to find the others. El primer actor era el padre, ¿no? The Duke Leto. David Carradine había hecho una serie de televisión muy conocida donde él era un guerrero que había tenido maestros orientales. Era la influencia del topo. Entonces Carradine, cuando supo que yo lo necesitaba, vino corriendo, ¿no? Yo lo esperé en Los Ángeles en un cuarto de hotel. J'avais acheté la vitamine E, E-vitamine. Like this, vitamin, half a kilo, in order to take one pill every day, no, to have the strength. Carradine came to my room. The first thing he saw was the pot of A vitamin. He said, "Oh, A vitamin!" And he drank all my pills of vitamin E, like it's a monstrosity. $60 was making. Well, was a big beginning. And then I say, we need to work together. You are the person I am searching. I wanted a musical group for every planet. Pink Floyd. They will make the music of Leto. Pink Floyd have a record, Dark Side of the Moon. For me, that is the human being, like the moon. One side with brilliant light, and the other side with the black, the unconscient, what is mysterious, what is deep.
C'est arrivé autour d'une réunion, Pink Floyd. J'ai dit, bon, ben, j'y vais. Appelle l'agent des Pink Floyd et dit, est-ce que je peux vous rencontrer?
Donc un jour, nous sommes allés à Londres. Ils étaient en train de finir de mixer Dark Side of the Moon au studio Abbey Road, célèbre studio. Et je me souviens, nous sommes arrivés et c'était très distant, les pop stars très distantes et tout.
I was eating, I know, hamburgers. The 4 guys eating hamburgers. I say, hello, they say, hello. And nothing, I could not speak, they was eating.
Et tout à coup, Jodo, on l'appelle Jodo. Hein. Jodo a dit non, il m'emmerde, on s'en va.
I start to insult them. How you, no, don't understand? I offer to you the most important picture in the story of the humanity. We will change the world. And you are eating Big Macs. No? How? And then they stop and they speak with me.
Et après, ça s'est très bien passé, quoi. Très bien passé, oui.
And we was speaking to make a big album with the music of Dune. Could be fantastic, no? In my version, the Duke Leto lo castra. He's castrated. And then how he will do a son? And then his wife a marvelous woman, no? A wise woman. And the guy have a love, a cosmic love when he sees this woman, and how he will make a child. And she take a drop of his blood, and he change the blood into semen, and then we see the gut of blood going inside the vagina, the uterus, and we follow the blood coming and go inside the ovule and explodes there. She get pregnant with the gut of blood. That's what I did. What will have if you are not the son of a sexual pleasure, but an spiritual pleasure? And from this spiritual love, he will create Paul. Paul was a young boy, but is not a normal boy. Was a mutant with a big soul, strength. Where I will find that boy? My son.
Hoy cumples 7 años. Ya eres un hombre. Entierra tu primer juguete y el retrato de tu madre.
I work with him in El Topo. Now he have 12 years old. I say, you will make Paul, but you need to prepare as a warrior.
So one day he said, we're gonna make Dune, and I want you to play the part of Paul, and you're gonna have to prepare.
I prepare my son to do the role exactly as the Duke Leto prepared his son.
So yes, you're gonna have to learn karate and make acrobatics, and your mind has to develop a lot. You know, you have to be a genius. As he wanted me to be the character.
I found teacher for him. I have a very strong person, Jean-Pierre Vignon.
Il avait, on a commencé, il avait 12 ans. Et là, je l'ai entraîné en karaté, jiu-jitsu japonais, sur toutes les techniques de pied-point, clé de bras, travail au sol, travail debout, synthèse de karaté, judo, aikido, atemi-jitsu.
He learned how to fight with his hand, with knife, with swords. He learned all that. And he was ready to do Paul as a real Paul.
Et j'entraînais donc Bonti 6 heures par jour pendant 2 ans, 7 jours sur 7.
That was painful. That was, and Jean-Pierre, he has no mercy. No, really. He was, no, it was, you know, we worked together, he had no mercy.
And old person say to me, but what you did? But why you are trying to change the mind of child and to make a superior person, no? I say, no, I was only awakening the creativity. I opened his mind. That was I was doing. I don't know if I changed his life. That now I am thinking why I did that, sacrifice my son. But in that time, I say if I need to cut my arms in order to make that picture, I will cut my arms. I will do it. I believe in to make a picture who will give a mutation to the young minds was sacred. You need to sacrifice yourself. I was even ready to die doing that.
Well, Hodder is a bit like a dictator or a cult leader in assembling his army around him, and part of Hodder's genius was in picking those people and finding absolutely the right people for designing the spaceships, the clothes, for designing the whole look of his world. I think he seized the potential of science fiction.
Para mí, la ciencia ficción era como un inmenso teatro, como una inmensa obra de arte. Cada navío espacial era un ser como un insecto, como un ave maravillosa. That was the spaceship I wanted. Foss, I knew him in the cover of science fiction books. Eran navíos con alma, como seres. Chris Foss tenía que ser.
This company called Camera One made contact with me, and they said, we're doing a film here in France, and we've seen your work in a science fiction bookshop here in Paris, and would you like to come over, have a chat with us and see if we could do something? And on that basis, I went to Paris. So I'm there, all I know is I'm staying the night, and then finally I was introduced to Alejandro. Here is this slightly strange man. First thing he does, he goes through my bag, starts pulling the bits out. And then he realizes that it's my bag. He thought it was his girlfriend's bag. So that's not the best beginning. Then they say to me, you're going to see a film that Alejandro made. I'm on my own watching the strangest film in the world. And right in the middle of it, here's this bloke crapping a golden turd.
You are excrement. You can change yourself into gold.
And this is my introduction to this whole environment. And I suppose already Alejandro had some sort of pull, some sort of enigma. I'd obviously found it quite strange, and they said, we want you to come back, we want you to live here, you will be part of us. And basically, I was then installed in Paris and shoehorned into Parisian life, and it was an absolute eye-opener.
Dan loved Paris. When he first got there, he thought it was very cramped and tiny and didn't understand it, and he was very tall for France, but he loved it. Well, he wrote me love letters, and he wrote me his impression letters. Here's one from September 10th of '75. He says, I'm sending along photocopies of some preliminary sketches of vehicles for the film. Right now we've got 2 artists working, a Frenchman named Jean Giraud and an Englishman named Christopher Foss. The former did comic books and the latter book covers before coming on Dune. Both are young. As I've mentioned, the whole staff of this picture is young. Jodorowsky at 46 is the oldest.
In that time I was like a prophet, I was enlightened. And I give to them the feeling they are not only making a picture, they are making something important for humanity. And they have a mission, they was warriors.
Alejandro was the guru. He completely motivated you, you know, and I still say yes to this day. I did some of my most unusual paintings and I'm very proud of them. And he was very supportive, very supportive. Alejandro motivated me to such an extent. I used to go in at weekends just to finish paintings because I've got this sort of memory of coming up with a pirate spaceship over a weekend. It's been mortally wounded and all this spice is spilling out of it. And it's got a camouflage which matches the asteroid. It was just like a fish. If it stayed very still, no one could see it. And then this was the whole, I remember seeing that very clearly in my head, that you think you're looking at a rock, just as if you were under the sea, and then suddenly something moves and you realize that it's an object. Still haven't read the book, no. I have no idea what the actual story is, none whatsoever. It all came via Alejandro and the script. Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, the story of Dune is what Alejandro told me it was. In an ideal world, he wouldn't have needed a script. You could have sat Alejandro down and he would have talked the story, you know? He would have said the words, he would have said, now we're in this landscape, and of course we've got all these scenes in the desert. The heat would be so intense, but the sky would be blue, a blistering blue. And Jesus, you were transported. Alejandro always had quite clear ideas. He would do his little piece of theatre. He'd say, these are the Sardoca, this is what they're like. He would play you music. And then, but it was wonderful because he sort of left you, he motivated you, but then he left you to interpret it.
I was searching for the light of genius in every person with an enormous respect. An enormous respect. And then every day I was feeding them in order to be free, to do the best of them.
On other films, they just leave you to your own devices. Sometimes you think they're not even particularly interested in what you're doing. And here was Alejandro, who was passionate about the whole project.
Every morning I give a big speech like the person who make football or rugby speak with the players. Every morning I make my speech in order to say, do it what you need to do, really, because this will be important.
I actually started life, I was going to be an architect. And that's what you see in the palace, you know, which is, you could physically build it. Because the story of my life is anything I design, it's entirely buildable. And if you look, there's a detail. Look, you've got the walls with weeping water, all very stylized. I designed it knowing exactly how they would build the set. I probably said, oh yes, Alejandro, we will do this in fiberglass, we will cast it like this. So I knew exactly how to do it and how to get the effect.
In that time, I was seducing Dalí, because I wanted Dalí as the mad emperor of the galaxy.
Dalí, ça nous paraissait être le seul empereur du monde qui avait cette espèce de talent extraordinaire avec un parler, une phrase.
Can nobody understand Dalí because myself never understand my work. Never Dalí understand one painting of Dalí because Dalí only create enigmas.
Dalí was something, eh? La primera vez fuimos a Nueva York con Michel Seydoux. Fuimos al San Regis, porque a Michel Seydoux le gustaba el Hotel San Regis y descubrimos que Dalí estaba en el Hotel San Regis. By chance. I was reading a book about the tarot, and then I take a page where the hangman. I write, I want to see you because I will make a picture with you. He liked it. To have this kind of invitation, he said, I will see you. I wait you in the bar. El bar tenía un cuadro de 6 metros de largo, pre-Rafaelite, donde había un rey, los nobles que tenían caras así, como ocultando algo. Y Dalí me dijo, me encanta aquí porque hay 6 metros de pintura dedicados a un pedo. Dalí me dijo, nos vemos en París. Y lo voy a pensar. En París, en los Campos Elíseos, había un restaurante elegantísimo y él estaba con su corte. Tenía 12 personas en la mesa y él. Sit down. I want to ask something to you. What, Mr. Dalí? When we was young, myself and Picasso, we went to the beach and we opened the door of the car. Always in the sun we find a clock, un reloj, clock, no? Do you find in your life a clock in the sun? And I say, what I can answer was very quickly because all the 12 persons are waiting my question. Because if I say, I find all the time clocks, I will be a person, a vanity person, no? Ridiculous. If I say, I never find a clock, I will be a poor guy. And suddenly came to me and say, I never find a clock, but I lost a lot. Ah, really? Okay. And then I wait you in Barcelona.
C'était un jeu. En plus, Jodorowsky a fait partie quand même du mouvement surréaliste. Donc ça plaisait beaucoup à Dali. Donc entre eux, c'était un jeu. Un jeu. Qui gagnerait le jeu?
Il était dans sa première aventure avec Amanda Lear, à l'espèce de personne extraordinairement sexy. Personne n'a jamais su si c'était un homme ou une femme. Un personnage complètement incroyable qui était là, une espèce de muse du poète.
Whenever someone like Jodorowsky would come to see him, it was a bit ambiguous. There was a sort of respect, yes, of course, yes, accept with your work, but there was also a lot of jealousy, I think. He was a bit jealous.
Il fallait le rencontrer, il fallait l'apprivoiser. Et lui, il avait besoin de vous apprivoiser. Donc, il vous fait passer des séances initiatiques à chaque fois.
Of course, Dali had absolutely no idea what Dune was about. He had never read the book. He didn't know who Frank Herbert was. He didn't know what Dune was talking about. So I had to cue him a little bit because I like Frank Herbert and I like Dune, and I said to him, you know, this is a great thing. That it's not just a science fiction, there's a whole philosophy. He wasn't interested in all that, I realized that.
Que me trató muy bien y que se hizo una aliada porque le prometí un rol de la princesa Irulan.
Yeah, I think that was hysterical, because Daddy said, yeah, and Amanda must play the princess. So they all look at me, they say, well, is she an actress? Oh yeah, of course, she'll play the princess, no problem.
Y me dijo, ten cuidado, porque Dalí es destructivo. Entonces, si te dice sí, va a hacer todo para destruir la película.
Dali said, can I have a helicopter? To him, to have a helicopter was the maximum of, you know. Yeah, you can have many helicopters. Can I have a burning giraffe? Yeah, well, what about burning? I want burning giraffe. All right, we'll have burning giraffe. We'll have elephants, whatever you want. And slowly, you know, the budget of the movie was going up and up and up. We were talking hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars.
Dalí said to me, I will work with you, but I want to be the actor más pagado de Hollywood. Quiero $100,000 la hora.
Je suis rentré, j'ai dit à Alexandro, on va jamais y arriver. Mais je peux pas le payer le plus cher du monde, c'est impossible. Puis de fil en aiguille, parce qu'on était têtus et qu'Alexandre me dit c'est quand même le seul qui peut faire l'empereur, l'empereur totalitaire, on a eu cette idée qui était de le payer à la minute utile. Je vais voir Alejandro, je dis combien de minutes il va tourner dans le film, il sera combien de minutes dans le film? Alexandre me dit maximum 5, probablement 3. Je dis voilà l'idée. Je vais le voir et je lui dis, je vais vous payer $100,000 la minute. Il dit, ça c'est génial! Je serai l'acteur à $100,000 la minute.
I say, I will take a moulage of you, hyper realistic, and I will make the emperor of the galaxy. He's so afraid to be killed, he have a robot, and the robot will act. And Dalí did, yes, if you give me the sculpture for my museum. Okay. And then, like this, I had Dalí. And Dalí, in our conversation, showed me a catalog of Giger. And he said to me, I think this person have a talent. I see that, but it's incredible. It's what I am searching for, the Harkonnen, for the bad guys. Gothic planet, Gothic characters. And then I went to search Giger.
Paris, das war der Platz, wo Jodorowsky und Dan O'Bannon meine Arbeiten präsentiert sahen. Und da wollten sie mich dabei haben.
Giger nunca había hecho películas, ¿no? Yo le dije, tienes que hacer películas.
Das war für mich total neu und unheimlich faszinierend.
I say to Giger, I need you as you are. You are searching in the deepest darkness of the soul. And that is good. That is your art. No, your art is, for me, is an ill art. Marvelous ill art, necessary for the Baron Harkonnen.
Jodorowsky habe ich zum ersten Mal in Paris getroffen. Das war an dem Abend, wo er sich Magma anhörte in einem Konzert.
For the Harkonnen planet, I chose here in Paris a very famous group in that time is Magma. Magma was gothic, military, terrible.
Je ne connaissais absolument pas le projet, ni l'idée, ni le bouquin d'ailleurs, ni le livre. Ça, j'ai su tout ça par la suite. Alexandre Jodorowsky ne nous a pas donné d'indication sur la musique. Je crois qu'il avait confiance. Maintenant, moi j'avais une idée, parce qu'il m'avait décrit la planète, les Harkonnen. Je savais que c'était pas forcément les bons, c'était plutôt les méchants. Donc ça, c'était plutôt... c'était simple à imaginer, parce que bon, Magma faisait plutôt une musique assez violente, assez typiquement dure, des choses comme ça.
Und ich war dann überrascht über die Qualität. Und ich sagte, ich fühlte mich wie Christus, wenn ans Kreuz geschlagen wurde. Ich war total, es war faszinierend, diese Musik.
I was using the best musician of this time, from rock. Mick Jagger lo quería para Fred Rauta, ¿no? Un personaje. Y bueno, ¿cómo voy a contactar a esta persona que no se va a impresionar porque yo tengo el poder de hacer una gran película? Él está en el colmo de la fama, de la gloria. ¿Cómo? Y me invitan a una reunión en París. Hay una gran reunión de París burgués. Y al otro extremo del salón, un gran salón, no sé, de 150 metros cuadrados, algo así, estaba Mick Jagger. Y yo lo vi a lo lejos, y yo creo que él me vio y lo vi avanzar. Empezó a avanzar entre la gente, después me di cuenta que venía por mí, atravesó el talón y se paró frente a mí. Y le dije, lo quiero para mi película. Y él me dijo una sola palabra, yes. Me recibieron mucho en los talleres de Andy Warhol, Candy Darling, todas esas personas. Y ahí conocí a Udo Kier, que era un gran actor de Andy Warhol. Hizo papeles formidables. Y me dijo que se actuaba. Baron Harkonnen is a big, big monster who have anti-gravitational implant, and he's in the air all the time because he's too heavy. Huh? Orson Welles. Orson Welles tenía una mala reputación porque decían que le gustaba tanto beber y comer que se comía las películas. Comía mucho y luego no terminaba las películas, que era caprichoso. Pero dije, no, Orson Welles es un genio, es la persona. Como le gusta comer, dicen que está en París, va a los restaurantes gastronómicos. Entonces envié a un secretario a preguntar en todos los gastronómicos restaurantes de París dónde comía Orson Welles. And we discovered a restaurant, and then he was eating 6 bottles of wine. He was eating. And then I asked to the chef, what is the best wine he want? He said, that. Then send me a bottle. And then he took the bottle and he wanted to speak with me. And then I speak with all the respect because was for me was an idol. Yeah, I say, I don't want to do it. I say, I don't want any more. I say, no, man. I say to him, I will propose something. If you do the picture, even if we pay what you want as an actor, I will hire the chef of this restaurant and you will eat as here every day. I can say, I do it.
Ich hatte die Vorlage zum Film hatte ich von Möbius, der hatte ein Storyboard gemacht und da drauf sieht man dieses Harkonnen-Chateau.
Ah, the castle was the big Baron Harkonnen, no? The big sculpture. That was where Baron Harkonnen lived in himself. The big ego, no? Mm-hmm. The castle. Open the mouth, a tongue go there, out. The spaceship came in the tongue. And then he said,
Ich war fasziniert von den Kreationen von den Harkonnen-Völkern und als ich dann diese 5 Bilder machte mit der Airbrush, ich habe dann mein Bestes gegeben für diesen Design herzustellen.
In order to go to the castle, there are a way with tubes, enormous tube, no? Come out, knife, and then in order to go to the Baron Harkonnen, you need to walk with this way, escaping of the big knife who won't destroy you.
Wenn das attackiert würde, dann würden diese Spieße so reagieren und die Leute aufspießen, die auf dem Weg da zum Schloss wären. Und eigentlich kommt das Schloss Harkonnen kommt in der Geschichte gar nicht vor. Also das wurde irgendwie in der Übersetzung von Alejandro Jodorowsky hineininterpretiert in die Geschichte.
when Paul get killed, he doesn't die because the Messias is all the humanity he get enlightened. In the end, his mind is the mind of every person. He's a plural being. I am the others. The others are me.
By killing the hero near the end, you also open this way of identifying yourself. So you're not identifying yourself with a hero, a character, but you start identifying yourself also with the universal consciousness. He dies, really physically, but he becomes everyone.
And then if the whole humanity get enlightened, the earth changes. The planet of sand start to grow plants, animals, be like a paradise. Dune is a messiah of the planet because it's a planet with conscience, with the same conscience of Paul. And the planet go to the universe to illuminate the other planets. I changed the end of the book, evidently. And the book is a continuation. The planet never changed. Huh? He's not awake, a cosmic consciousness. It's not a messiah, the planet. I did that. It's different. It was my Dune. When you make a picture, you must not respect the novel. It's like you get married, no? You go with the wife, white, the woman is white, you take the woman. If you respect the woman, you will never have child. You need to open the costume and to rape the bride. And then you will have your picture. I was raping Frank Heber, you know, raping like this, but with love, with love. And then I came with that. Hein? Okay.
C'était un tellement bel objet, tellement bien fait, et à l'époque, il n'y avait pas de photocopie, c'était que des photos de chaque dessin. D'abord en couleur, aussi bien fait, avec autant de précision sur les costumes, sur les techniques utilisées.
Every studio have one book like this. Every studio, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, everything, all them, Michel Seydoux, give a book like that.
Et ça les a pas... Moi, je pensais justement, notre démarche, je disais, bon, voilà, ils peuvent avoir une certaine méfiance de Jodorowsky, mais comme on montre la manière dont on va mettre la caméra, comme on explique chaque plan, la manière dont on souhaite le tourner, ça devrait les rassurer. Ça les a pas rassurés. Ça n'a pas suffi.
À Los Angeles, je n'étais pas optimiste. Nous avons, avec les Américains, parfois des rapports difficiles, vous savez. Enfin, nous avons eu.
On était arrivé quasiment au point final. Il fallait trouver les 5 derniers millions de dollars de l'époque. Le film en coûtait 15, estimé à 15.
Mais nous étions invités à Walt Disney, au studio, par le chairman of the board. Il a regardé le projet et il a dit c'est vraiment un projet formidable. Mais c'est comme Concorde. C'est un avion exceptionnel, mais jamais ici. Et là, je me suis dit qu'on allait rencontrer beaucoup de problèmes.
Hollywood prefers ideas which they can relate to, things which sound like two other current movies. If you can tell them it's like Jurassic Park, Crust of Twilight, or the Hobbit, Crust of the Killing Fields, it makes more sense. To come in with something which is more complex, which has adult themes and a degree of ambiguity, and especially a film which has spiritual and metaphysical ideas, is something which has most studios running scared.
On a été reçus d'une façon toujours correcte, extrêmement sympathique, mais avec toujours la même réponse. Et quand on leur a donné le livre, ils étaient très impressionnés, ils n'avaient jamais vu ça. Et à chaque fois, ils nous disaient « c'est super, c'est extrêmement bien construit, vous avez résolu les problèmes techniques de ces effets spéciaux, économiquement c'est raisonnable, mais on ne comprend pas que votre metteur en scène. »
They are not qualified to judge this material. They're not designers or artists themselves. Most of those guys are accountants or money men. They want to know what the bottom line is.
Hollywood no visualizaba la ciencia ficción así. Estaba en 2001 Odisea del Espacio o en pequeñas películas de la serie B. Pero una inmensa película que costaba millones de dólares con todos los efectos, no lo concebía.
Il était peut-être un peu long aussi. Peut-être que le film durait peut-être un peu longtemps.
They asked me to make a picture 1 hour and a half for the theaters. And I said, no, why the time? I will make a picture of 12 hours or 20 hours.
The worry was that it would go way over budget and it wouldn't have an audience because no one would want to sit through that long a film. So those things should have been at least talked through, I think, before a presentation was made, because someone should have known that the studio people would be, there would be a red flag all the time about how bizarre it was.
Le côté complètement extravagant de Jodorowsky, surtout après le rendu de La Montagne Sacrée et de El Topo, ne leur donnait pas confiance pour mener ce projet très ambitieux, parce que 15 millions de dollars dans les 1070, c'est beaucoup, beaucoup d'argent. Et ça a été leur réponse en trouvant tout parfait. Tout était génial, sauf le metteur en scène.
Tú tienes que hacer como un poeta tu película tal como la piensas y tal como la quieres, y no aceptar notas, que cambies, que esto, estar, que esta persona, no. La película debe ser tal como yo la sueño. The picture need to be exactly as I am dreaming the picture. It's a dream. Don't change my dream.
I believe deep down that people did not do this film in America because they were afraid of him. They were afraid of his imagination, they were afraid of his mind, and they were afraid what it was going to do to them. And I think that is the real reason why it never got made, because people were scared.
This system makes of us slaves without dignity, without debt, no? With a devil in our pocket, this incredible money. I in the pocket this money, this shit, this nothing, this paper who have nothing inside. Movies have heart, boom, 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 have mind, have power, have ambition. I wanted to do something like that. Why not?
It was canceled at the point where all of the planning that could be done on paper had been done, and we were ready to start constructing sets.
They were taking a hiatus before they went to Algeria to shoot. And he was sent back here to do some research on film stock. And then he got the call and said, it's over. No money. And he went crazy. Everything was in Paris. Everything he owned was in Paris. He'd sold his car, so he was crashed on our couch, and he stayed there for about 2 weeks until he drove everybody nuts.
Complete disaster that was never made. Complete disaster. It would have been quite extraordinary.
I was disappointed. Sure, I was disappointed, you know, because if the film was made, there was like a, you know, it's like you have a dreamed life. My life could have been this and that, right?
Très déçu. Très déçu parce que on y a tous cru. J'y ai cru.
Alejandro was very, I think, very hurt, very disappointed. It's a big failure for him.
Ça, c'est mon interprétation. Mais je crois qu'il n'avait plus envie de faire autre chose après un projet pareil, qui était le projet de sa vie, quoi. C'est mon sentiment. Ouais.
Je pense que la vexation qu'a subie Alexandre Jodorowsky, en n'étant pas choisi, en étant éliminé parce qu'il était trop original, parce qu'il était trop surréaliste, c'est un dommage inaltérable. Je pense que Jodorowsky l'a dans son cœur à vie.
Ich war überzeugt, dass das etwas Tolles geben würde. Aber dann kam die Laurentis-Tochter, hat dann uns das Projekt weggenommen und an David Lynch gegeben.
Supe que David Lynch will direct that, I have a pain because I admire David Lynch. He can do it. He's the only one in this moment who can do it that, and he will do it. I suffer because it was my dream. Another person will do that maybe better than me. And then when they will show the picture here, I say, I will not go to see that because I will die. And my sons say, no, we are warriors, you need to come and to see that. And then they take me, like an ill person, I came to the theater, and I start, even I think I will cry and start to see the picture, step by step, step by step, step by step. I became happy because the picture was awful.
We come for you!
It's a failure. Well, it's a human reaction, no? Because, oh yeah, it's not beautiful, but I have that reaction. Yeah, I say it's not possible. It's not David Lynch, because he is a big artist. He's the producer who did that.
Je n'ai même pas regardé le film et je ne le regarderai jamais.
Jodorowsky was ahead of his time. I think the big problem was that he was bringing in a lot of ideas which take people decades to process. I mean, when you want to change the consciousness of the audience, you want to change the consciousness of the Hollywood executives and alter the whole ecology, you have to be extremely patient, like Kynes the planetologist. These things take thousands of years. And very slowly these ideas might permeate the system, but Hodo was hoping it would happen within his lifetime, that it would happen now. The truth of the matter is that it may take generations before movies actually aspire to the level that Hodo is wishing for.
From this supposed failure come a lot of creation. In the life, things come, you say yes. Things go away, you say yes. We don't do Dune, yes. That is, yes, we don't do it. And then so what? And then so what? Dune is in the world like a dream, but dream changed the world also.
Dune is like Paul. So Dune was, his throat was cut of the film. The film wasn't made, the film was killed. But, you know, you can hear in some films, I'm Dune, I'm Dune, I'm Dune.
Je pense que ça a été un guide pour certains. En tout cas, moi je suis persuadé que ce storyboard, il a circulé dans les couloirs d'Hollywood. Je ne peux pas imaginer sans. D'abord, ça me fait plaisir de l'imaginer. Il faut toujours positiver.
The original Star Wars, the 77 film, there is a lot of visual reference from what Jodorowsky laid out on paper. Just the way his sword fights were designed. There's a huge amount of influence.
There's a scene of Paul dueling with a robot and doing training, and it's a lot like Luke dueling with the ball in the Millennium Falcon. What I found most interesting looking at this was that there's shots that are from the robot's POV where the robot has a heads-up display where he's analyzing the environment around him. And I was thinking about it, I can't think of an earlier iteration of this scene which we've all seen now 1,000 times. The Terminator looking at somebody and analyzing their face. It's one of these things where this is a movie that never got made, but it has its fingerprints all over so many other movies that came afterwards.
Giger, he make the monster of Alien. Why he make the monster of Alien? Because Don O'Bannon create Alien. They take Moebius, they take Giger, Foss. And Hollywood start to use my group. No? It was very fantastic.
Dune is this massive asteroid that has a near miss with Earth, but it still manages to seed the Earth with all these amazing spores. In a world where Jodorowsky's Dune doesn't happen, maybe Alien doesn't happen, and when Alien doesn't happen, what happens is Blade Runner doesn't happen. There's no Blade Runner, there's no William Gibson, there's no Matrix, there's no all these other things that sort of come organically down this line.
A lot of people took images and ideas with them and incorporated them to other projects. So it always leads back to Jodorowsky.
When you get involved in the process of bringing a beast like this to life, and when you don't get the chance to realize that, to direct it, to put the thing on screen, it goes on living inside your head. You never get a chance to exercise it. And a story like that can stick around and goes on haunting your dreams for pretty much the rest of your life, unless you can get it out.
Adam Moebius say to me, what you will do? You will die. No, I will not die. For me to fail is only to change the way. If we don't do that, the Dune we was doing is, the roots are Dune of Herbert. But this Dune is us. It's the optical, it's a creation. And then I will use everything I put in Dune to make comics. I say to Moebius, why we don't do a comic? And I start to dictate in Cal. And then a lot of images here are in here. And then I found an Argentine Spanish, Juan Jimenez. There I make all the spaceship I designed for Dune are in the Meta Barons. Even the Duke Leto, I made him castrated by a bull, and we'll find the sorcerer who will take a drop of his blood in order to make the child. I did it here, it's here. Like I was shooting, I did it. I start with Dune, but then I go farther, no? Farther. I continue, I did it, my word. I think Dune will be fantastic if somebody take this script, even if I am not alive, and do a picture in animation. Now it's possible. I can die, they can do my picture. I have 84 years, but I am still creating. I am not but all my life I create, and it's more and more and more. The mind is like a universe. It's in constant expansion, like the universe, exactly like the universe. Open the mind. The opening of the mind is every day is open. That was this picture. Open the mind of all the persons who work there, from the producer to the artist, for the workers, for everyone was an opening of the mind. This work was ambitious, but not too. Was ambitious. Myself, I have the ambition to live 300 years. I will not live 300 years, maybe I will live 1 year more, but I have the ambition. Why don't you will not have ambition? Why? Have the greatest ambition possible. You want to be immortal? Fight to be immortal. Do it. You want to make the most fantastic art of movie? Try. If you fail, it's not important. No? We need to try.